Hello everyone, this is Mike Nolan, and this is my Multimedia Week 6 presentation on public opinion on the Bureau of Land Management. Okay, so this is the overview. First, I'm going to give just a real quick overview of the Bureau of Land Management and what the responsibilities are under the federal government. And then next, I was able to interview three of my friends and get their opinions on the Bureau of Land Management and the federal government's role in either expanding, decreasing, or sustaining the federal government's role in the Bureau of Land Management. And lastly, I'm going to tie that into some supporting documents, including some of the founding documents as the Constitution and founding theorists as Taylor and Weber. Okay, so just a real quick history on the Bureau of Land Management. It was established in 1946. This was done through a government reorganization by President Harry S. Truman. And in this reorganization, President Truman merged the General Land Offices and the U.S. Grazing Service, which created today's BLM. The BLM currently operates under the Department of the Interior. And the overall mission of the BLM is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of public lands for the multiple use and enjoyment of present and future generations. This is preserving our oceans, lakes, streams, and wildlife areas. And according to the BLM's website, the BLM's 2018 budget for current appropriations is $1.1 billion. So, as it relates to public opinion, two out of the three people I interviewed in regards to the federal authority of the BLM argued for a reduction of the BLM based on the belief of the unconstitutional actions of the BLM, such as land acquisition from states and states' residents, and also for a reduction in the spending of federal government based on the expenditures of the BLM. So, to address the first part of their argument, requesting the reduction in the budget of the BLM. The BLM has an operating budget of $1.1 billion. However, with a federal deficit nearing $600 billion in just the first half of 2018, I think it would be difficult to argue that there would be a significant financial impact from reducing the budget of the BLM. Now, while there might not be a significant argument to reducing the fiscal budget of the BLM, there is support for the federal authority to be reduced from the BLM. I found this in two documents. First, in the Federalist Paper 45, this was written by James Madison, and in this he sought to define the power of the federal government and stating that the powers delegated and proposed by the Constitution to the federal government should be few and defined. And if you move beyond the Federalist Paper 45 and into the Constitution, specifically Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 of the Constitution is known as the Enclave Clause. And in the Enclave Clause, this authorizes Congress to purchase, own, and control lands in a state under specific and limited conditions, as the BLM does. However, these conditions are specifically stated for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, according to the U.S. Constitution. Now, as you can tell by the language in this, the erection of forts, magazines, and arsenals, this language is a bit dated, and most recently, the terminology that was in this constitutional amendment came into question in 2014 when the BLM became entangled in a dispute over public lands in Clark County, Nevada. In the dispute, Nevada resident Cliven Bundy refused to comply with the orders of the BLM in removing his cattle from what was considered to be public lands. However, the BLM insisted that the cattle had been illegally grazing on Clark County, Nevada public lands that belonged to the federal government. Bundy denied these claims by the BLM and claimed that he had a right to the land. However, the BLM denied Bundy's claim to this professed right to public lands, maintaining that the federal acquisition of the land was necessary to protect an endangered tortoise. Now, as you probably know from the widely publicized dispute, there was many opinions on both sides of the fence as to the dispute regarding this land that had been used by a farmer for over 25 years, and now this endangered tortoise being on the land, and thus requiring the federal government, or allowing the federal government to seize the land and now become property of the federal government. While the two that argued for a reduction of the BLM's role can be linked to constitutional authority, as for the one that supported the BLM, this person felt that the BLM was a necessary federal organization that was necessary in maintaining efficient and bureaucratic preservation of public lands for use. Now, in this argument to sustain the authority of the federal government and the BLM, I think the works of Max Weber and his characteristics of a bureaucracy can be cited. And additionally, I think the works of Frederick Taylor can be cited in the justification of the federal government maintaining the BLM. In Max Weber's bureaucratic management theory, it contained two essential elements which apply to the BLM, and this includes structuring an organization into a hierarchy and having a clearly defined rules to help govern the organization and its members. I believe that an argument could be easily made as to the difficulty that would exist if each state were responsible for creating their own hierarchy and rules that governed each state's prospective BLM agencies. And furthermore, allowing each state to create their own BLM could result in states following on arbitrary whims or irrational decisions based on the emotions and intentions of the state, and not for the benefit and preservation of all public lands. And now if you apply Taylor's scientific management and his one best way was obtained through efficiency, productivity, and control. And I believe there's a strong argument of maintaining support for federal control over the BLM, and someone could contend that it would be impossible for each state to ensure efficient preservation and acquisition of public lands without the management or oversight of the federal government. For example, without federal oversight, it could be argued that a national park in California may establish differing standards than a national park in Nevada, resulting in potential degradation of national monuments or parks due to a state's inability to manage the land independently. So in obtaining my public opinion, the Bureau of Land Management and opinions vary with the responsibilities of the federal government, or it should be a state government, while some see that it should be limited by the federal authority, and some see that it should just maintain the way it is. Those in support of the degradation of the BLM can rest their basis on constitutional interpretation, while those in support of maintaining the BLM can rest their basis on the argument of founding theorists such as Max Weber and Frederick Taylor. So here are the references I use there. Obviously our core book here in the Classics of Public Administration is in there, as well as the Constitution and some additional articles. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to watch my presentation, and I look forward to seeing everyone's presentation.